Good evening and welcome to our budget membership meeting. I'm very happy to be here tonight and to see that we have so many people just as for the AGMs. And the budget is something very boring, but I think that the meeting tonight will be exceptional and quite different from what we are used to at CAPE. I should mention right away that we are a new executive elected, and I am the president. I've been the president for the 1st of January 2015. I was elected, well, there were 16 other members on the national executive. EC directors, TR directors, one for the Library of Parliament, one vice president, one EC vice president, one TR vice president, and they all campaigned on a platform that we called the Members of CAPE Standing Up. And we had a number of things in there, and we'll be mentioning one tonight, which was the creation of a strike fund for CAPE, because until now, CAPE never had one, and that was part of the main items on our platform. And with this platform, we were elected, but since then, we had a National Executive Committee retreat with all members, even the ones who did not campaign on that same platform. And what was developed after that retreat is on page 2 of the explanatory document.
Strategic objectives that the overall new National Executive Committee have adopted. And these strategic objectives guided a final budget elaboration exercise that was done by the National Executive Committee, after the Finance Committee had been doing its job of preparing all the background material, and that binder there contains all sorts of details that, I mean, we'd love to share, but it's dreadful. Now, what's important is to note that there was a clear connection, an attempt at clearly connecting those strategic objectives with budgetary priorities for this fiscal year that started May 1st. What we did, and you on page 2, you see that there are percentages being assigned to the different strategic priorities, and I'll explain briefly what we did with that. This is not really in your package, but this budgetary table was kind of, we assigned some level of, and part of it is a bit of guesstimation, but it's the most informed guesstimate that we could make about, for example, when we look at an important budget line item, which is the cost of staff, what there is the allocation of effort related to mobilizing and informing members. So we have 2 fabulous information officers that are at the back, Pierre and Ben. We also have a mobilization officer. So we assigned their salaries to that strategic objectives. So that's just in a nutshell what we attempted to do. So tonight, what our menu is going to be, what we're trying to achieve is get a platform for dialogue. And I think it's really important that you feel that this is a process that should also be owned by the members. Alors, on va aller en 3.
So we will have 3 steps. First, for 10-15 minutes, I will be making a description of the present reality, which is conditioned by the Bill C-459, which was presented by the government, which has a major impact on unions and on the collective bargaining. Then I will be mentioning those strategic elements that are part of the document, that work document, and Here again, we will link the political context with the emerging priorities as budget allocation. And Nick Giannakoulis, who is the EC Vice President, also the President of the Finance Committee. And then we will be looking at the budget. Then we will have a question and answer period after a political summary, but we'll keep that question period limited. And then because we want to talk about the budget, and we will be having questions more on the budget after that.
Of what is in stock for us with Bill C-59 as pertains to the collective bargaining. So raise your hands in the room who's aware of what's in store for us. So I think we have a very well-educated crowd here, because I can tell you when I went to the AGMs out east last week, there were just 2 or 3 hands out of 20 of people who actually were aware of the fact that the budget implementation bill contains a massive Trojan horse in the form of its Division 20. And Division 20 is basically an enabling mechanism for allowing the Treasury Board President, Tony Clement, to impose whatever he deems necessary regarding the accumulated sick leave banks, the way that sick leave will be accumulated or calculated in the future, and the establishment of a short-term disability plan. La semaine dernière, j'étais au comité des finances.
Last week, I was at the Finance Committee, and for those who would like to we have 2 hours listening witnesses who are very dynamic, and Yanni is a teacher, a professor at Carleton University, who is said to be an expert and brought to the committee a new perspective, saying that the government's proposal makes it so that young people want to support that plan for short-term disability, and the older crowd wants to stay put, to keep what they have. And Cape people, and I'm very proud to recognize here Wayne Fang, who is the president, said that Cape should answer those false ideas that are being given by Mr. Lee, because this model, of course, could disadvantage young people in the new system, but it doesn't mean that unions are not ready to discuss to make the system more equitable between generations. And there are a number of means that are different from what is being told at the bargaining table to have an equitable objective.
EC bargaining team will be at the table with the employer again. What we've heard to date is that from an accumulable 15 days of sick leave per year, the government is proposing that we go down to 6 days non-accumulable as from the moment that we start the new system. And then assorted with that is the establishment of a short-term disability plan that would contain a waiting period of 1 full week, and then kick in, if you're deemed eligible, with 6 weeks of full salary recovery on short-term disability, and then from the 7th to the 26th week, a 70% salary reimbursement on your short-term disability. And then if you're still sick, then long-term disability, as we know it, would kick in. So the argument from the employer is that we need a system that gets people back to work and accompanies them, etc. So we all agree that there are faults in the current system, faults in the long-term disability, the fact that there's no case management. We can absolutely agree on these things, but what we cannot agree on is that they just choose to impose a model without even discussing how we can make the situation better without throwing the baby with the bathwater. Parmi les solutions qu'il faut envisager, absolument.
Among the solutions we have to think of is, first of all, why do we have to go to external service providers, private companies who want to make profit, rather than thinking of having a management of disability which is internal to the government of Canada? Because the employers said clearly that they were not in a position to find a private provider ready to absorb such a huge number of employees. So the private sector says, whoa, 220,000 people, we will not be able to set this up quickly. It might take 2 years to set up. Which is quite scandalous, is that the government already identified for the 2015-16 budget economies of $900 million.
Said on budget day, we are going to save $900 million from the fact that we will eliminate sick leave banks from those public servants. And those sick leave banks, for those of you who are not aware, they're part of past remuneration. So basically that was the result of past bargaining for which we've signed a contract with the employer that said you are accumulating 9.75 hours per month as sick leave credits, and that is part of your remuneration because we were historically probably not able to meet inflation levels with your increase in salaries. And now they want to eliminate it, and they're not even putting a price tag on it, meaning they're not ready to take any money out of their pockets to monetize these credits, unlike what they did with the severance pay. So we're all very upset of what happened 4 years ago almost, when PSAC signed almost a secret deal with Treasury Board at the time to give up severance for voluntary departure. But what's in store right now is a gazillion times worse, for a number of reasons, because we won't get anything for as far as the current proposal goes, we wouldn't get anything in exchange of these accumulated days. We would lose the capacity to rely on this insurance. It is kind of an insurance. It allows us to feel comfortable staying at home when we're sick rather than going to work because we fear losing income. So the short-term disability plan that is on the table is just an insult, to be honest. And what people need to be aware of is that taking sick leave out of the collective agreement also means that your union can no longer grieve, can no longer adjudicate, and is in a much weaker position to support you if you have to fend for yourself with the insurance company. So I think this is a disgrace. But the most profound disgrace of this all is the unconstitutional nature of the attack. Bill C-4 from 2013 was already a profound dent in the model of collective bargaining and labor management relations in the public service. It basically created the conditions for eliminating our right to arbitration, our access to arbitration, which was the dispute resolution mechanism that CAPE members would typically default to. And it stacked the deck even more in favor of the employer by giving it the unilateral power to decide who is an essential employee, who isn't, and to do that not only before bargaining starts, but all through the bargaining process. So I think we need to take a moment to see how already the employer had stacked the deck in its favor, and with C-59, it's basically taking all the aces and all the high cards and saying, all right, you go ahead with your threes and your fours. And so we are, all the unions, but definitely CAPE is joining forces with PIPS on a constitutional challenge to Bill C-59 based on several recent legal decisions from the Supreme Court, one in particular regarding the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour versus Saskatchewan government, based on what was deemed to be unconstitutional by the fact that the essential services legislation actually removed the capacity for union members to have any recourse in a dispute. They had no access to arbitration nor access to strike. What we are arguing right now is C4 deprived us of our access to arbitration, and with C-59, the only item on which we could possibly motivate our members to go out on strike, which is the sick leave and short-term disability, is now being removed from the table because it can be imposed at any given point. Now, let's not all be depressed about it, okay? And I think what we need to take away from all of this is that we have tended to underestimate in the last years the strength in numbers. And I think that we've all been conditioned to being bullied, and so we really need a lot more priming, or whatever we call it, right? To get ourselves started and standing up for our rights. But we must do it. We must talk to all our colleagues, notwithstanding which union affiliation they belong to. We need to start getting our act together to stand up to the bullies. And we started in a small way with our Monday pickets. After the Budget Implementation Act was filed, we thought, okay, we need to at least show that we care a bit. Like when C4 passed 2 years ago, there wasn't much of a union reaction in terms of mobilization. There was a challenge, again, a legal challenge, but I think we cannot just rely on legal challenges. And I think a lot of people are also putting their eggs in the electoral basket, and I think this is important. This is definitely a necessary step, like having the Conservatives booted out after too many years of bullying and erosion of the model of public service and Canadian democracy, is a necessary but not sufficient step to get back a public service that we deserve. Now, I don't know if any of you have paid attention, but yesterday, PIPS issued its campaign for Public Service Week. Has anybody seen their PIPS campaign? I invite you all to go see their website. They have 10 points in there that, for me, fully resonate with our membership. So even if we didn't do it ourselves, I invite, and I think this is all what union solidarity is about. Like, let's not reinvent the wheel. PIPS has done a marvelous job at teasing out some key elements like that are, quite well formulated. Again, I don't have it with me, but it's really things like unmuzzling scientists. Of course, this is their pet topic, but also just getting back the evidence. All right, so evidence-based policy, is gone. I don't know how many of you do policy anymore. We do policy-based evidence now. We kind of retroactively fit, supporting arguments to support an ideological decision by this government. And I believe that we need to raise the public's awareness on what this means for the erosion of the democratic model in Canada. Le modèle de démocratie doit...
The democratic model in Canada has to be based on an independent, non-partisan public service that can say the truth to politicians to avoid having politicians take back the agenda. And since these codes of conduct have been reinforced in all departments, what happened is that there was a decreasing of the opinion of the public servants. They are afraid of sounding the alarm, seeing those practices that are really reprehensible. And the government and the senior public servants are violating the code of conduct.
And this is a profound erosion of the model and of the ethical basis on which public service must lie. So that's enough. So there are 4 ways in which we can fight back. So I highlighted the legal way. So we will go ahead with a legal challenge, and you'll see that we've done a bit of allocation for that in the budget, and that we're thinking of, when establishing a defense and strike fund, what we mean is when we need to challenge things that could harm our members, it could be all forms of challenges. It could be in the form of legal challenges. It could be in the form of an ad campaign. It could be in all sorts of forms. But this should be part of kind of a defense/strike fund where we can draw money for these kinds of things. So the public opinion is a big, potentially a big leverage, because I think the Conservative government definitely assumes, and we've kind of internalized that message, that the Canadian public hates us, that the Canadian public has been completely pitted against public servants. Because, we're lazy fat cats, we don't work hard, and we actually take sick leave when we're not really sick, and that kind of rubbish, right? So they've been spinning that message very effectively. But I think the mainstream media has been actually unearthing a lot of the democratic erosion dimensions of the Conservative policies, to a degree where I think we're at a tipping point where I believe that we can actually turn around and say to our anti-union brother-in-law that kind of says, I can't believe my tax dollars are paying for your sick leave. Well, if I lose my sick leave, do you think you'll ever aspire to having sick leave yourself? And, there's been ample demonstration that having access to paid sick leave is your best guarantee to curbing public health costs. There's economic reasons for having paid sick leave instead of a waiting period to a short-term disability that creates instability and fear amongst workers. So the public opinion battle, and linked up with an electoral battle that we're going to be staging. Well, we're not going to stage it, but it's going to be a huge one in the months to come for October 19th. These are definitely other pieces of the puzzle, but I will get back to mobilizing. And mobilizing means all sorts of small and big things. And we've been publishing these things, and we realize that even 4 pages is too much to digest. So that's why we got Ben now, who's a great a graphic designer who will start doing, sexy one-pagers that are easy to digest. So all local leaders will start getting their little info kit so that you can have those easy conversations with members to get them to turn on their attention to what's happening. Because right now, our worst enemy is ignorance. Our worst enemy is uninformed members. The minute members get informed, the minute they start connecting all the dots and they realize, whoa, that's a lot. That's another huge attack on our rights, on our democratic and our constitutional right to freely bargain our working conditions, they will maybe take their sneakers and go walk on the pavement. So yesterday at the demo, we had people from my own old department or home department. I had EC7s that I had never seen at demos, showed up and said, you know what, that's pretty cool and that's pretty empowering. That's pretty empowering. I'd like to come back and I'll tell my folks, right? So I think we need to get that sense of, wow, there is strength and there is safety in numbers. So the more we talk, the more we spread the word, the more we have these like, who cares if you're a CAPE, a PIPS, an AJC member? Doesn't matter. We're all workers. We're all in this together. We're all suffering the same blows and the same humiliation every day. So let's just all stand up together. And, you know, we can fight back. And a strike scares a lot of people. And so strikes, when a union takes a strike vote, and I think there's an example of what happened to the PAFSO, the Professional Association of Foreign Service Officers 2 years ago, where basically they had an 87% vote in favor of strike action. And of course, for them, it was an escalating strike action that could go up to walkouts, right? And what they did, they were on strike for almost 6 months. But very few of them lost income. Because, well, PAFSO had been building a strike fund for 7 or 8 years prior to the strike. And they basically offered full salary reimbursement. They have a progressive dues structure, so it could arguably be okay if people pay more dues that they receive a full pay replacement when they're on strike. Unlike, you know, so for example, PSAC has a proportional dues structure, but they pay a flat rate per day. But that's kind of small details. The important part is you had foreign service officers, diplomats, people who are really, really ambitious, and they definitely don't want to be singled out, that actually voted in favor of this job action, and they held to it for 6 months. So if they can do it, I can't believe ECs can't do it either, right? And building towards that means small steps. But what was funny with the PAFSO job action, it took them no time to go from 0 to 100. When they were faced with an intransigent counterpart at the bargaining table, they were able to say to their members, hey, they're not moving, they're not bargaining in good faith. And I think we have the very same message that we can easily tell our members. This government is not bargaining in good faith. So we can do a lot. For that, we need money. Guess what? So before I move to the budget part, I'd like to open the floor to comments, questions. There's one single microphone right there in the middle. And then we'll move on to the dollars and cents and things. Well, a few strategic things related to allocations, but everybody's shy or completely? Yes.
Hello, I'm Marnie McCall from Employment and Social Development Canada. And earlier this week, Madame Charrette's message to the public service was posted on our internal blog. And at the end of the day yesterday, which is when I saw it and read the comments, and I haven't checked again today, but almost all of them talked about, you know, on the one hand, we get the compliments and the praise from the clerk about how good a job we're doing and all of this, and on the other hand, we have to deal with Tony Clement. Almost all of the comments address that difference of opinion.
Thank you. I was searching my purse because today I was at a barbecue at Terrasse, and do I have it? Or this is an old one. Pierre had prepared a real good message with an analogy to hockey, right? Where there's the umpire's been, you know, taken out of the ice, and now with Bill C-59, they're actually getting rid of the ice, you know, reducing the size of their goals, and we're still scoring, or we're still playing in spite of that. And I think this is a really good analogy. And the introductory comment was to say, well, it's great to have 1 week where we receive praises, but when 51 weeks are used to find ways to undermine the public service, I mean, come on, guys, this is ridiculous. And I was just, thank you, Maureen. I just want to everyone to pay attention, and I don't think we brought those, and I don't think we have actually those. The PSAC started off with having this very neutral button that respect in red. And then PSAC, their word was integrity. Like, we didn't start the escalation and come up with our own word. We thought, okay, well, we can agree on both these messages. It's important that we respect ourselves and the Canadian public that we serve. And I think our integrity has been eroded to and under attack for so long. And I think I would invite every one of you to go find these and wear these buttons all week to show that you care. And so tomorrow there's going to be a barbecue at the Booth Complex, and there's going to be another one on Thursday, I don't remember where. Then there's going to be two on Friday, one at Lac and one on the corner of Elgin in downtown Ottawa. So these are, tokens of our, the union's appreciation and trying to demonstrate to our members that we definitely care.
I just wanted to add that C4 took away arbitration, C59 is taking away bargaining. After the next election, the next thing will be the RAND formula. You will, if you don't belong to the union, you will not have to pay dues. That's the, excuse me, that's the goal of Tony Clement.
Thank you, Maureen.
Hi, I'm Jessica Squires. I'm on the National Executive, and I'm the president of the local at Library and Archives Canada.
And the chair of the Mobilization.
And the chair of the Mobilization Committee. I just wanted to share with you a conversation I had this morning with a member at my workplace who came to me this morning because I've been telling people to look at the budget documents, encouraging people to review them. And he came to me this morning and he sat down and he said, so I've been looking at the documents, he said, and he asked some questions, but it very quickly segued into a conversation about how basically we are in a position now of having to show with our budget allocation, with our resources, that we are not, that's no longer going to be business as usual. And he raised with me the fact that now the government has basically put the writing on the wall, and that there's actually, we don't know what's going to happen. I think we can mostly predict what's going to happen over the next year. There's going to be an election. That's unpredictable. But apart from that, we know what the government wants to do. We know they have a majority, so we can kind of see the way things are laid out. But after this round of bargaining, the next fight is going to be pensions. And he raised this with me, that we have to start now to start building up this organization to be able to defend our pensions, and that means that we have to be trying to defend our sick leave now, so that we're in a position to be able to defend our pensions later. And I think a lot of people are aware of this, and so I'm really glad that we are able now to talk about how the budget that we're presenting today, that we're recommending, is based on politics. It's not just about moving nickels and dimes around in line items. It's based on an assessment of the landscape and our priorities. So as a union that needs to defend its members.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you very much, Jessica. I just want to answer one quick. In terms of the next government, I don't want to carve, right? I don't want to roll over. I think we actually can still win the sick leave fight. Alongside the constitutional challenge, we'll actually file an injunction order, basically, and trying to get from the courts a suspension of the application of Division 20. That's still a lottery. Like, we can't count on judges to rule that this would, that we can demonstrate there's an irreparable harm in the elimination of our sick leave. But I think we have some good arguments. Now, In terms of commitments from different political parties, we know that, we've had declarations, and it was funny because yesterday I was on the French radio with Bernier et compagnie, and Trudeau had a long interview after, and the very first questions that Bernier asked him related to, so what are you going to do about respecting the public service, right? And of course, it's all political cha-cha-wa-wa, right? Of course. Let's not kid ourselves here. But we have already received a couple of letters, one from Tom Mulcair, the other one from Justin Trudeau, regarding some of their early commitments about the rights of public service unions, committing to repealing Bill C-525, Bill C-377, if ever it passed, but it looks like it won't, but who knows. And in the case of Mulcair, he even went on to commit to repealing these elements of C4 that have been most harmful to us, right? So, I mean, it's on paper. It's definitely not a guarantee, but at least we can hold them accountable after the fact. So I think the real fun will start after the election, right? And I am confident that this government will not be re-elected. And I think we need to all feel confident that it can happen, like they won't get away with murder, because they have done so much harm. Like Bill C-51 is even worse, right? And, there's a long list, and there's tons of stuff. So thank you. And I'm sorry. Oui, à vous la parole.
Hi, I'm Darcy Hartwick, President of the local at Infrastructure Canada, recently joined. I'm curious why we don't talk more about what's fair in terms of sick leave. What are the comparables? What do other unions get, other services? Because having a brother who's a minor, he doesn't get any sick leave. He can take as many sick days as he wants, he doesn't get paid for it. I have a sister who works in social work. It's not that different. We seem to have a pretty good deal if you look across the country and all the possible professions that one could do. And so in terms of swinging the public tide of opinion, if that's the goal, I think you need a rhetoric that's based around, I don't know, some other comparable that would show, this is fair, what we have, and what they're trying to propose to us would not be fair. And, maybe we want to be somewhere in between. That's why we can give a little bit, or come up with something, as you say, that would just be sort of better for everybody. But I don't know that most people would be convinced that what we have right now is like the bare minimum that we could accept.
That's a very good comment. Two things. Compare with what's comparable. You can't really compare government employees with Walmart employees, but you can definitely compare them with big company employees like Bombardier, IBM, Apple, whatever, right? So if you're going that route, well, I'll tell you, in many private sector large companies, there is no cap on sick leave usage, and you are paid while you're off. Very much like the MPs and senators have it now. MPs and senators now, when they're sick, they are deemed to be sitting in Parliament, and they are paid. There is no calculation of their numbers. So, of course, this is not, but this is just to turn the mirror around and say, all right, you want to compare us? Remuneration. They base their voted increase on the top, I don't know how many companies with large number of employees, and the threshold that they were looking at was a 2.4% increase per year. They finally voted themselves a 2.3% increase based on private sector comparables. What are they offering us? 0.5. So if there's no cap on sick leave, and there's also short-term disability, reimbursable at 100%, and pensionable, what they have on the table is not even fucking pensionable. Like, you go beyond the first 6 weeks of full salary reimbursement, when you fall on the 7% salary reimbursement, it's no longer pensionable time. I mean, sorry guys, this is a huge, huge, huge concession that they're asking from us. And what we should tell your brother or sister is, what are we after here? A race to the bottom? Or trying to see the public service as the engine train of good labor, good working conditions in Canada, and seeing us responsible for pulling other people up rather than dragging everybody down with us when we give them up. I think we absolutely need to stand strong and say, guys, what we're after here is not just protecting our own. We're after providing a model for good working conditions in Canada for every worker, everywhere, across, from ocean to ocean. Hi, Michael.
Michael Donahue from Health. I do have a question, but I also wanted to add to what you already said. I agree with everything you just said, Emmanuel, but I'm on the bargaining committee, and those comparisons that you said are happening. The government's doing them and we're doing them, and the government comparisons are very interesting. They look at what's in the private sector and just cherry pick the worst of the worst. These guys have nothing, and those guys have nothing, and those guys have nothing, so you should get, well, you're getting something a little bit better than nothing, so be happy with it. I mean, we can play the cherry-picking game, too, where we can go out and pick the private sector companies that have it way, way better than us. So there are comparisons that are happening. And at the bargaining table, we've never taken the position that we refuse to discuss any changes to the status quo. Our position has been we're prepared to discuss changes if you can show us that they're in the best interest of our members. And the government has not been willing to discuss anything. They've come to the table and said, here's your deal, this is what you're going to get, and we're going to go to Parliament and legislate it, and you'll have no choice. So we haven't really been engaging in that dialogue when they are trying to put a gun to our head, but we are definitely willing to look at what's out there, talk about compromises, talk about comparisons.
Just, it's the gun to our head, the sword over our head, and the knife on our throat. It's like all these three things together. Yes,
now, I have a couple of questions. One of them is about the $1 million strike fund. Do you want me to defer that, or do you want to take that now?
It will be further. It will be after.
Okay.
I'm going to even probably preempt some of these questions when I do my presentation.
Okay. So then my only question at this point is, what is CAPE doing to ensure that Stephen Harper is not back 4 months from now?
Well, we have not, like the NEC has taken a, yeah, can you answer, Jessica? Because you were the mover, shaker and mover.
At the last meeting, we actually didn't get to the motion that we were proposing, but basically, I think we've talked about it in the mobilization committee and conjointly with members of the education committee, and there's a motion that's been proposed to basically take a position that we're not going to. I can't remember all the elements. It's a little more nuanced than this, but essentially we're not taking a position in favor of any one particular party. We're encouraging members to vote and to vote informed, so inform themselves on the platforms of the political parties and vote for parties whose platforms are aligned with the interests of our members, and that there's actually there's one more national executive meeting before the summer, and I'm hoping that at that meeting we'll be talking strategy around how to intervene in the election. But right now there are only ideas, so ideas for that would be really welcome from the members.
Bring them on.
One possible thing we could do is like a report card, or we could ask questions to the candidates, or develop questions that we can answer by looking at the platforms. There are various approaches that we can take, and then we would give that information to members to help them decide how to vote. There are other things we could do to encourage our members to get out and vote, and we'll also need to be careful about how we craft things in light of the political activity rules, and make sure that members are informed about what they're allowed to do during the election in light of Treasury Board regulations. But that discussion that that's off the top of my head, and we're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks at the National Executive. So anybody that has ideas about how to do that and ideas for our participation in the election should definitely be sending emails or calling the national office or talk to your local leadership to get that information in so that we are hearing it.
Merci, Jessica. Just another quick comment. There's a kind of a comms group of inter-union that meets, and there's definitely an electoral strategy that's going to be further tuned, fine-tuned by the different unions. We don't all take the same approach, but we will try as much as possible to coordinate. So, for example, PSAC has been doing its town hall meetings and some training for door-to-door canvassing for getting just citizens to be aware of the issues around the erosion of the model of public services and the impact on the service delivery to the citizens, etc. And so they're doing some door-to-door, and they've invited CAPE members to join. So there's definitely opening for inter-union collaboration on these things. And Simone, I'll take a last question, and then we need to move to the budget.
Hi, excuse me, I'm Simone Powell, a member of the National Executive and VP of Local 512 FAC of Canada. Just going back to about the sick leave and then how we, looking out for ourselves and how does that compare, and other people don't have sick leave. I think just it's really important, and as we move forward, and it won't be just this year, and the continuing over the years. Just like there's been nationally, the Canadian Labour Congress and other unions have been talking about pensions in terms of improving a retirement income for all Canadians and moving away from just trying to, while certainly trying to defend their members and their benefits, but changing that sort of conversation and that argument about that. You're right, it shouldn't be about which job you have and you're lucky enough to be in a good unionized job and have pension, and we need to be talking about retirement. And so the CLC has had a campaign about expanding the CPP and improving pensions for all. We can be talking about and should be talking about sick leave in the same way. It shouldn't be because you happen to have a certain job or not. All Canadians need access to good sick leave. Nobody should be at risk financially because they get sick. And I think and this executive, we are trying to sort of do more of that, move outside of the end of our nose, right, to supporting the battles and the fights and the struggles of other people, and we've been doing that and trying to not just be having that inter-union, sort of the collaboration with unions across the, like PIPS and PSAC, but reaching out and trying to, and we've been seeing success of this. So at these pickets that we've been having at the PMO Mondays, we've been supported. There's been multiple unions, and they're not just the federal unions. We've had OPSU there. We've had Unifor there. We had the new head of CUPW, Mike Pawlicek. He came out and spoke. So, and we're trying to do some work that goes beyond even those within the unions and supporting, social rights and social movements outside, because we need to be able to communicate. And this is what we need to be talking to our family and our friends and our neighbors, that what's happening here, we're a canary in the coal mine, that this is part of a larger agenda that's not just within Canada but globally, an austerity agenda, which is the shrinking of the public service and the cutting back of public services. And this is just one aspect of it, but it's all part of something larger. So just wanted to...
Merci, Simone. Merci. Alors, je vais juste...
Thank you, Simone. So now I'm going to talk about some of the elements which are different from one budgetary process. Okay, saying we'll look what we had last year, we'll adjust either increasing or decreasing. So I was saying at the beginning of the meeting, how did NEC come to this when they received the recommendations from the Finance Committee to reallocate some amounts or increase allocations for some things which are more of a priority? So for the first strategic objective determined by the NEC, members have the information and opportunity to engage in and shape the union. This means that today we've decided to invest money so that we have a webcast, which hadn't been done before, for budgetary meetings before. It will be available tomorrow. We're going to regroup the main discussion topics that we've had this evening on the choice of creating a strike fund or to allocate more money to mobilization. And we want that the dialogue with members, the points, criticisms of NEC be available so that all CAPE members can see both sides of the coin. And I committed to have a more democratic association, not because each member has a vote, but because each member can give their opinion. Each member can also bring forward objections, and that these objections be known to those who make the decisions. We want to see to it that all points of views are expressed, and I don't know if this was much done until now. So if we need more money to mobilize, people have to feel that they belong to CAPE, that their identity is part and parcel of CAPE. We didn't have these small lanyards before. That's just a small example. In the hall, for those of you who want them, we have small flags that we can bring to demonstrations. We have other things to make noise, and all of this is promotional material, and we'll invest more in promotional materials this year. And we want to launch a participative approach to think about how Constitution and bylaws create a movement where we look at certain proposals.
Right? An association where your AGM is not sovereign, where your AGM can actually not bring forward amendments, where it's either a yay or a nay. There's no discussion. There's no massaging. There's no there's no amendments. So I think there are ways of rethinking the way that the association is wired to allow for more democratic and participatory approaches to the way we manage the association. And I'm ready to give away a lot of the power that the Constitution gives me, because I do feel that there's good things about being centralized. It brings agility, so you don't have to consult galore. But it creates democratic deficits, and I think we have to move beyond that. So that's for objective number 1. Objective number 2, CAPE and its membership are respected and effective members in the labor and social justice movements. And Simone just alluded to it. So there are 2 things that we're proposing in the budget, and we'll have discussions about this after we finish this. But basically, we're putting forward a very, very symbolic new line that's called, well, it's not a new line, it's an old line that was eliminated, and we're bringing it back, a line called contributions. So it's a way for CAPE to support some causes. So, for example, there's what did we do? There's a the postal work, the home delivery campaign. There's a coalition for saving home delivery, and we kind of gave a bit of a contribution to pay for some printing of some materials, and these are things that we can associate ourselves because it's something that is aligned with CAPE values overall. So this is a very small token, like it's $18,000 a year. Like I don't think it will create a great, huge precedent. Now, on line item 15, and this is more kind of a heads up than anything we can actually decide tonight, but we thought as a NEC that it was important to give members a heads up about our intention to have a discussion about CAPE joining the CLC. So again, Simone hinted to the fact that the CLC has put together a series of campaigns. The most recent one is called Better Choice for Canada. So there are 4 topics that they opted to focus on, which is, child care, health care, good jobs, and pensions. So these are all things that touch workers, but also all Canadians. And the CLC is the big house of labour. CAPE is not a member of it. PIPS has joined the CLC 2-3 years ago. I've had very interesting conversations with Debbie Davio, the president of PIPS, who said, you know what, I didn't want to join CLC, and now I realize, like, oh my God, it took us so long, and we should really have done that much earlier. Because, of course, there's things about the CLC that we can complain about. But it brings an amazing sense, again, the strength in number, the value of that. So this conversation will not happen tonight about whether or not to join the CLC, but just so you know, we're putting it as a year 2 item. So this conversation will start later in the year. Sur l'objectif, le troisième objectif.
On the third strategic objective that was developed by the national executive members, local and staff, work together to improve and defend the everyday working conditions of CAPE members. What do we mean by that? Well, local leadership and delegates to CAPE could get support or minimal training to play a role and be present in their workplace. But now this is very unequal. There are some locals where the local leadership has really a role, an active role to play, where they can get commitment on not individual representation issues, but or for consultation, union management consultations. But what we realize is that we have to recruit our local leaders so that they be more present at the workplace. And today, well, we have a cohort of local leaders, and I see a few here in the room who came to the training that CAPE is given at the beginning, and it's a one-day training. And today there was one on mobilization and on the creation of democratic and stronger locals. So that was really interesting as a theme, and it's something we hope will bring us to have bigger locals, and that are integral parts of democratic structure that is trying to get solutions. So our labor relations officers will always be the main representatives, the official representatives, in situations of grievances and complaints. But our delegates have to be equipped to work with the LROs, and a number of those labor relations officers have been playing a mentorship role with some leaders of the locals, but it depends on the individuals, on what they prefer personally, on the activities of some delegates. So we want to have a more proactive approach, and very early in our mandate we talked about after the resolution made by the board, we have an agreement for services with other unions, and one of the issues is the training.
So the issue is not to reinvent the wheel. There are things that we can do in-house, and there are things that we could so much like surf the wave of PSAC. I mean, I have the president in the BC, Garth Mullins, who's asking, can we organize a steward training out west, and I'm saying it would be great. Find out what PSAC is doing. We'll fly an LRO so that you have that CAPE dimension to that training, but let's see if we can work much closer with the other unions, so it has the double advantage of saving the kind of training development costs while also building the collaboration bridge between our CAPE stewards and the PSAC stewards. So that's about Objective 3. Objective 4 is about successfully defending and improving the working conditions of our members through bargaining. And this is where the big ticket item comes. So, interestingly, this had been part of discussions, and as I had said earlier, it was part of the platform that I ran on alongside my colleagues. And what was decided at the last National Executive Committee meeting was that we should actually be bold about the need to establish a strike fund for a number of reasons. One, because we cannot count on the fact that the bad decisions or the bad dimensions of C4 will be repealed anytime soon. So our access to arbitration is far from being guaranteed, even if a majority NDP government was to be elected, right, in Dreamland. Now, the reality, too, is that if we have no strike fund, the employer is laughing because there's no way we can fight back. We have no capacity to demonstrate the strength in number with that strike fund, without a strike fund. Alors,
so we need to prove to the whole world, including the employer, that CAPE is setting up a defense fund and a strike fund and say we are ready to fight. But the $1 million represents an amount that is almost equivalent to the budget surplus that we got in last year. So why did we get it? Well, for a number of reasons, and one of them is that we underestimated the fact that we have more EC members. We thought that the number of members would continue decreasing after the workforce adjustment, but in fact, we did get an increase in our numbers. And the second increase in the fees, the dues, so arrived at the same time. So there is a multiplier effect there, and there were staff members that left, and they had higher salaries, so there were cost savings in the salary portfolio. All this made the surplus possible. Now, CAPE often had surpluses along the year, but what we did, we put it into our assets, or in our unrestricted reserve. And what we are going to do at the end of this fiscal year, the surplus is going to go to the reserve, but for 2015-16, we will take that from that reserve and put it as a new expense for $1 million to start the new strike fund.
Something like $2.6 million in unrestricted reserve. And we've had auditors over the years say you should always have the equivalent of 1 full year of a budget as an unrestricted reserve, which is a very, very cautious approach. So having surpluses is good to build that cushion. Now, if the membership supports it, and the process for voting on this budget I'll outline in a minute, but basically what we need is much more than $1 million. Actually, I mean, we haven't come up with a final figure, but I think we were, going with like a $10 million figure at some point as a kind of target. And we looked at what other unions have done, in particular PIPs, which we can compare ourselves with, and how they did it is they took a special levy, so they increased in one bump their dues for a while, and they created their strike fund that way. And then they bought a building, and part of their strike fund is their building, another part of their strike fund is somewhere else. I don't know all the details. But all this to say that they had a plan for this, right? And of course, the NEC will have further discussions on how this plan will build itself in the future years. But I think we need to be conscious of the fact that this is really just the beginning, and we need to, create the conditions for it to continue building over the next few years. And I've alluded to, the PAPSO model where they decided to reimburse full salaries when their people were on strike. If we were to do that with CAPE members today, I think we wouldn't have more than one, with our current unrestricted reserve, I think we'd have something like 1 day of strike at full salary reimbursement for each CAPE member, right? So it's not tenable. And of course, that fund would be used not only for strike purposes, but also for all sorts of other defense mechanisms, as I alluded to, legal, public awareness through, ad campaigns and things like that. So it would be a combination of all this. Now, just in terms of process, Nick can go quickly through all the main big lines and explain how things have moved over the years, what we achieved last year, and some of the things that we've kind of rethought after last year for budget allocations. And then the process is after this meeting, probably towards the end of this week or early next week, because what we would like is to send ballots out, and ballots are being sent to everybody for whom we have an email address. So if you've received your invitation to this meeting, it means you're a member and you will get a ballot, and everybody who got this email, who receives regular communications from CAPE will receive the ballot. If you know of people who are still RANs and they want to have a say in this discussion, well, it's great. Let's sign them up as members so they can actually participate in the democratic processes of the union. Now, with the ballot, we want to put, as I said, information about the debates or conversations we'll have tonight. We may have a 2-pager on key arguments for, against, whatever, and a little montage of, the best comments from tonight, so that people who have not had the occasion to come here or to watch the full extent of the webcast will actually be much better informed to vote. So that's going to be the process, and thank you for taking that on now. Nick?
Right. Randy?
Closer to the microphone. Oh.
1 second.
Do you want to take this? Come here.
Thank you for the information. I was looking for a balance sheet because I noticed we're running a deficit, and I've been in finance before, and I'm going, well, it's fine, you can run a deficit, but what does it do to our standing as an organization, like our sustainability? And without a balance sheet, you can't tell. So I would suggest that a financial statement or balance sheet needs to be provided to support the vote.
Yeah, and typically, Randy, we do limit the information that we send out in this format to the membership, but once we have the audited statements, we will provide a balance sheet that will be posted on the website. But in terms of, I think maybe I can do a high-level overview of the material, actually, and then we can kind of just comparatively take a look at all the years as we move across the spreadsheet. Is everyone okay if I actually just sit down here at the table as opposed to using the podium? You prefer the podium? Yeah? Okay.
You have to go up there, be in the limelight.
All right. And also, before I start, I'll just like to thank our staff that helped prepare all the material. So we've got Sandy Wesnick and and we've got Mark Cordy, and then from our finance committee we've got Andre Picot, who's here this evening, and as well we've got Chantal DeRoche, and we've got Kim Chow, who's not here, and Alex Butler, and we've got Sean McGuire. Just kind of taking a high-level overview at the material. So I'll just draw your attention to the various columns as we go across this. But if you take a look at the first column, which represents fiscal year 2013-14, and then right next to that we have the non-audited column for fiscal year 2014-15. This could be a reference point. And then if you go over 3 more columns to budget 2015-16, that's what we're proposing, and then as well for 2016-17, 2 columns over. So the ballot that you'll receive, that'll be for those 2 respective fiscal years for 2015-16 and 16-17. And we can start off by taking a look at the second column, which represents fiscal years 2014-15. And I think, Randy, that's probably the column you were referring to at the bottom. Were you referring to a deficit within that area? But effectively, that's a surplus. So this year we have approximately a $900,000 surplus. That's what's going to be actually transferred into our reserve. And what we're proposing for this current fiscal year in terms of building up this defense fund, the strike fund, if you will, we would be transferring a chunk of the budget into that field, and then that would put us into a deficit for this current fiscal year, but let's say next calendar year, and then we would level off. We don't have anything showing in 2016-17. But if you take a look at 15-16 and 16-17 in terms of the overall expenditures, if you remove that $1 million that we're proposing for the strike fund, they're effectively more or less quite similar. The differential is about $70,000 or so. All right. And I'll just kind of go back to the top. I know this is all very numerical. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions, and as the night progresses, this will it'll be a little difficult to follow, perhaps. But starting with the revenue base, so this is a projection, and we started with a baseline membership projection for revenue. So the number that we're using is slightly above 12,800 members. And that's going to be fairly consistent between the 2 fiscal years. It's slightly higher for fiscal year 16-17. We have an allocation in there for some additional associate memberships. So we currently have partnered up, as most of you may know, with Service Plus, with PIPS, and we're hoping to attract more associate memberships. So hopefully we'll have a slight increase in those revenues. Then as we move down and we take a look at the second line in terms of salaries and benefits, that is relatively consistent between the 2 years, and that represents a staff complement of approximately 32 positions, if you will, within the national office. So there's not too much there in terms of an overall change. And we do have some other items underneath that in terms of just some severance pay along lines 3, 4, and 5. Now, there are about 6 budget lines that Emmanuel mentioned earlier in terms of some of the strategic priorities. So as we move down, we take a look at line number 6 for communications. So we are proposing an increase, as you will. That's something that definitely is a strategic priority. So that is an increase of approximately, well, we're going from about 136,000 from this current fiscal year up to about 180,000 or so over the next couple of years. Continuing on that vein with line number 7 for training and development, that's an area that's obviously going to that's going to increase considerably for stewards training as we're proposing. Then underneath that, we've got professional services. That's fairly consistent. That represents legal services primarily. And we've got, if you flip pages, you can actually look at the respective breakdowns on page 1 on the next page, or rather, sorry, page 2. So that has all the different categories that are broken down. So there's a few areas there. Now, with the office expense, we are proposing an increase for this current fiscal year. And that increase is specifically to upgrade our IMIT infrastructure within the national office. So that's primarily to upgrade the telephone system, video conferencing. And as well, we're currently going to probably have to take a look at the main boardroom as well for upgrades to that as well on the teleconference. Then, if you look at the next line, rent and operating expenses, that's relatively consistent. So that's approximately $846,000. That's what we're paying. That's not the rent per se. That includes the lease. That includes utilities. That includes maintenance. So there's quite a few areas, and I do have a detailed breakdown if anyone does require additional information. I know that has been a contentious item in the past, so we do often get questions on that. In terms of the line item 11 on computer expenses, so this year you'll notice that there's an increase of up to $231,000. We're actually proposing to revamp our membership dues database. So this is an area that we've been looking at for a while, though, but I think now we're going to be in a position where we can look at utilizing a different service provider and trying to modernize just the IT infrastructure that we have. Travel, that's fairly consistent. The meetings have increased considerably, as Emmanuel mentioned, and this is primarily with all of our mobilization, engagement, and other consultations that we'll be doing. Collective bargaining, that's quite consistent. I mean, that represents primarily salaries for the bargaining team. The fees affiliation, if you take a look at year 2 in 2016-17, that's where the increase would be for the proposed affiliation with the CLC. Local rebates are quite consistent amongst the years. Right, yeah, and if you do take a look at the detailed breakdown on the last page, that actually does include not only the rebates, but as well the expenses that we paid to locals directly that don't actually have a bank account and apply for the annual rebate. And one of the new lines there, well, sort of new line, 17 in terms of contributions, what Emmanuel mentioned as well. And then we've got obviously line 18, that's a new item. And then we've got a contingency fund, which we've always had. So that's kind of just a very, very high level overview. You do have the definitions as well that you can look at if you do require additional information. Any questions?
I'd like to ask to Claire and Evans if we have questions or comment. Do we have anything coming in? No?
And please come forward to the microphone. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Manuel. Greg Phillips from StatsCan. I had a question. The first year there's $1 million going into the strike fund, but there's nothing allocated for the second year. I was just wondering why, if it's a strategic priority of the new NEC, why there is no money identified for the second year, what the planning process is, because $1 million, as we all know, doesn't go very far in a strike situation. So why there is nothing identified for year 2 to go into a strike fund?
Thank you. This is a great question, Greg. Do you want me to start answering, and then you can fill in? Basically, the assumption is what we thought to ourselves is that we know that we have a surplus of $900,000 this year, and so I think it's safe to just apply this surplus to next year to set it up. I think, as I said in my remarks, for us to really build it, we'll need to have a strategic thinking to different items such as the dues structure. And I don't think we didn't want to, like, we put a marker down for the CLC affiliation because it's a rather simple and relatively an inexpensive item, right? It's 70 cents per member per month. But if we were to be serious about a strategy around setting up a strike fund, we will have to have a broader discussion. And I've already indicated, I mean, different models could be discussed. do we have a levy that is limited in time? Do we have a progressive due structure like now most unions have? I can only just let you know that when we made just a basic analysis of what our due structure means in terms of if we, on average, the dues is about 0.6% a year on average, right? If you take the value of our $48 a month. Now, what the AJC has done recently, for example, the Association of Justice Lawyers, is that it had a dues calculation that was progressive and had a 1.1% value, and the percentages are always based on the lower echelon of any level, right? So it's the lowest echelon of the EC3 or whatever. Now, for now, the flat rate is a very low value. Now, the AJC just voted themselves an increase. They went from 0.75. That's what their baseline was originally, and then they're having an immediate increase. I think it kicks in September of this year to 1%, and then the following year they're going up to 1.25 of salary. So it will be a progressive scale. But again, that's one option. There are many other options, but these discussions have to happen, and they probably would kickstart in the fall as we initiate the new budget cycle around the time of the next AGM. So that we always have budgets voted for 2 years, and that's kind of a prevention measure. Like if we were to have an unsuccessful budget vote, never know what can happen, we still can fall back on what was planned and voted on by the members the year prior, right? So that's how we build a 2-year cycle. We vote on 2 years, but we come back every year for a vote for 2 years.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Greg.
And I think, Greg, if I could just add, though, I think we want to start a dialogue more than anything else. I think initially for this current fiscal year, that's something that we can easily commit to because we are in a surplus situation. But as we kind of progress, I think it's going to involve a lot more engagement with the membership. So that's basically that's how we were looking at the issue.
That sounded, is this on? That sounded really complicated to me. Are you saying that within the next 12 months the union will hold a vote about increasing dues in order to fund a strike fund?
I'm saying that we're going to be engaging in conversations with the membership. Will we engage in a vote in this year? I don't know. We have to have conversations. We have to get started on a conversation. Yeah. But it could lead to, yes, thinking about a different dues model. You can stay closer.
So at the beginning, you mentioned about you didn't like how at our AGMs we can't pass motions and stuff like that. And, am I right? Okay. And that you thought it was more democratic that at an AGM you should be able to vote, pass motions on different issues. At our AGMs we have about this number of people, and so it'd be only this number of people that would be able to vote on something like that, as opposed to the current process where every member who has an email address on file who gets to vote. I don't understand how this number of people voting on behalf of the 12,000, 13,000 members is more democratic than the current process where all members get to vote on things, on issues. So maybe you could just explain that so I can understand it better.
Thank you, Greg. I think it's assumed that there would not be a vote at the AGM if we were to allow the notion of exploring amendments to a motion and then a vote would happen after. Unlike in some situations where we've had ballots sent to members prior to information AGMs being organized. Now, I mean, there's all sorts of models. You can think of a delegated convention. I don't know that we want to go there, but these are all parts of discussions that we must have that would be broad-based, and we would initiate that with the intent of getting more members involved and engaged, and it would create, I hope, a snowballing effect where we would have AGMs where people would want to come, and there would be kind of fights over who gets a seat at the table, right? So I think this is a habit we need to develop, and it's something to build, and more engagement and more dialogue and dialectic, let's call it that, right? But definitely not voting on something, but bringing on perspectives that maybe the NEC wouldn't have thought of, or the ERC wouldn't have thought of when putting forward these ideas. That's yeah. Jessica.
So this isn't a question. Is it okay if I speak anyway? Mm-hmm. No, I wanted to add to that actually, and to a couple of other points. One of the things that the National Executive is recommending in this budget is there's money actually allocated to the committees, and one of the processes that we want to undertake is this engagement with the members to have a conversation about what kind of union do we want and how should it be structured. And there are a number of variables. There are there are various possible structures, as Emmanuel mentioned. You could have, in any union context, if you look at other unions, there are various possible structures, and there are pros and cons to each of them. So, and the key is, excuse the turn of phrase, but this division of powers. It's like, if you have an executive structure, what is the executive empowered to do? If there's a council structure, what can the council do? If there's a delegated structure, what can the delegated structure do? What can the locals do? What can regional councils do? So in our union, all we have is a national executive. The national executive can pass motions, and the president is empowered by our constitution to spend money, to sign checks, to make decisions based on the budgets that have been voted on by the members. In another union that I've been involved with, there was a council that was basically delegates from each region or each local. So that's another possible option. There are pros and cons to that. It's a way of keeping those discussions closer to what's happening in each workplace. Right now, the National Executive has sort of a variety of representation from different workplaces, but not every workplace is represented. Maybe we could consider having a structure where we have representation from each workplace. These are all question marks, though. It's a conversation to have, and it's based on what do we want, how can we put this union in a situation where members feel ownership over what's going on and can feel like full participants, and making this into a union that can defend the interests of our members. Maybe we'll end up keeping the status quo with just some adjustments, but that's a conversation we need to have, and it's in the budget. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that there are other possible expenses that we should take a cautious approach in terms of trying to allocate, and that's why I think it's important that we haven't dedicated the surplus for next year, because we don't know what the situation will look like after the sick leave thing is finished and or after the election. And we may be in a situation where we actually need to drastically augment the services that we can provide to members. If we end up with a short-term disability plan and we're deluged with requests for representation against a private sector provider, right now, we don't have training for that. We don't have staff who know how to deal with that. And that is a potential expense that we haven't anticipated because we don't know what the outcome will be. So taking a cautious approach with that second year surplus, I think, is wise in that respect as well.
Thank you, Jessica. Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres intervenants?
Are there any other speakers?
Hi, Liam Lynch from ESDC. I guess just a quick comment and then a question around the training and development. First, on just as a comment, I think this is great that you kind of put forward this in a transparent manner. I think oftentimes you've laid the groundwork with some of the financial things which will allow us to have a broader discussion going forward, where I think as in the past, some people have proposed ideas, we said, well, we don't really have the money set aside for this, so we can't even bother discussing it. Now we've actually laid the groundwork, and you're pushing it back into the members' hands to them to make a decision down the road. So I applaud you on that. The question I have is around number 7, training and development. So I understand there's a significant investment there, and I know in our local, a lot of our members have been seeking out training, and especially in the past there's been some difficulty sometimes with the French language sessions, sometimes getting our members in because there's just too few or they're booked up. So I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of an elaboration of what some of these numbers are and some of these increases and what kind of practically they will mean. Because I think much as the days of us going to arbitration for collective agreements are over, I think some of the days of relying on our LROs who have done an incredibly good job and have always been there for our locals, we also need to kind of staff up and train our own kind of members to defend themselves and take some basic actions and have the locals take on some basic actions. So I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a little bit of detail on some of these numbers and how they kind of jump up. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I can take a start at that. So specifically, if you take a look at the first 3, I guess, items broken down as per stewards training, right? So that's the corresponding complement. I mean, we're currently proposing to do more steward and local training and development. So that's a significant increase. We're effectively looking at going up to about $180,000 versus what we spent this past fiscal year, if you will, which was somewhere in the range of about maybe $35,000, right? So that's a significant increase. The latter items, though, when you take a look at in terms of just staff development, and then you've got an allocation in there in terms of the president's development, and then management development and language training. If you take a look at those last 3 line items in 2014-15, they're effectively under $1,000, right? So I think just kind of given some of the challenges that we've had over the past year or two, there just really wasn't a lot of opportunity for that. So I think as well, just the staff being just quite busy, with day-to-day work operations. But that's an area that we want to reinvest just to get back up to, a normal level, if you will, right? So to kind of reopen those opportunities for training and development.
If I may add, in the context of discussions we've been having with PIPs and PSAC, for example, if we were to offer some of our stewards to join in on some of the other unions' training, possibly this could involve them going on longer term, kind of full week here and there trainings, plus having possibly one of our staff accompany for portions of that, because we need to keep the Cape specificity. So these are likely to be more like longer periods of training. Even if it's not so many people, it might involve maybe 10 people for the whole union going, say, for 2 full weeks of training, not together, but 1 week here, 1 week there. And already just this week, we've built the stewards training so that many of the people who are here are going to be here for the full week, and that's not been something we've done so much historically. So we're saving, quote unquote, on travel, but we still have the salary reimbursement when people come out from Nunavut. We have to think of salary replacement when they travel, even the day when they come in. So, I mean, we want to be much more proactive. So definitely the additional allocation is there, so we have that flexibility.
Yeah, and we currently do have a committee that actually is exploring models with other bargaining agents, with other unions, just to see what their best practices are, and if it's even possible to tap into some of that training. But again, as Emmanuel mentioned, it's the salary reimbursement that's actually going to eat into that, I think. But to do any kind of substantive training, you're probably looking at a minimum, I would imagine, of at least a couple of weeks. If you want to really have, even if it's just one position, let's say, identified per local, one individual, that's actually going to have more comprehensive training. That's what you're looking at to go in that direction.
Hi, Ryan Kelly, also from ESDC. First of all, I just want to make a comment about the budget, documents and the presentation in general. That in previous years we were sort of left discussing line items like office furniture, legal fees, and for the average member it was very abstract. So what does this budget say about where we're going? So having it organized by strategic priority is definitely a big leap forward. But like you alluded to and said that we really do need to broaden the conversation about what are the strategic priorities, and really it comes down to, like, look at the Tories. Their budget is it's a political budget. They lay out their attacks and their defenses. Our budget also needs to be a political document that lays out our attacks and defenses. How are we fighting back? How do we and we communicate with that with how we're going to spend? So hopefully starting in the fall, that'll be something that more people get involved in, and the more people that are interested and participate in creating those strategic priorities, the more people that are going to be available to be mobilized to actualize the implementation of where the union's going. And then ideally we're going to start to trigger that virtuous cycle where we go from a demobilized, centralized union to one where people are involved and see themselves as one of the union, not that what is the union doing for me, that their mind will change, that they'll see themselves as the union. I've been a vocal supporter of establishing a strike fund for many years. I wish that previous generations of CAPE leadership had the foresight to realize that we couldn't rely on arbitration forever, that relying on arbitration without a strike fund was sort of a form, as a former colleague put, a form of collective begging. Strike fund really is like an essential requirement of any trade union organization. And I see this $1 million simply as like we're opening up the bank account and we're getting it started. And it may be late, but it's there's going to be more fights to come. But I will say that I think that $1 million is, if you're talking about a general strike, isn't a lot of money. But there is certainly, if we're cooperating with other unions and relying on targeted strike actions, there's a lot of things you can do to make that money go far. If there's a major project that's coming down the pipes that the government wants to implement, and PIPS and PSAC are orchestrating or coordinating with us on how to interfere with that implementation via job action, a half a dozen ECs could have a profound effect. You don't have to have everyone marching in the street. We can be very smart and strategic with how we fight back. So I think that what we need to think about as members moving forward, that okay, well, this just establishes the bank account, but now we need to have that conversation. What is the level we're going to finance it to, as you mentioned? How are we going to do that? But one important piece that we cannot forget that's equally important is how will the strike fund be governed and controlled by the membership? We have the sort of the latecomer advantage that we're forming a strike fund now, that we can get the governance and the democracy right, and I certainly think we're headed in the right track if we can have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And I think kind of looking back at all the budgets I've been involved in over the past probably 6 or 7 years, I mean, this is the first time we've actually taken a step back and focused on identifying those strategic priorities. And I honestly can't believe that we never did that before, because I think it really frames the discussion in terms of where we're going, and it really is quite important to have that dialogue with the membership. But in terms of the point about the strike fund, though, I mean, this is clearly going to be a very provocative budget. You're either going to look at this and I think it'll be polarizing initially. And I think we have no other choice but to have this kind of a discussion, right? Given the current environment that we're facing with C4 and C59, I think there's no way around this. We definitely have to have that very difficult discussion, and I think we'll be quite busy over the next year we go around and have these discussions with locals and with members. But even here within the room, I mean, I would be almost as bold as to ask, what do you think? I mean, you know, given what we're proposing in terms of taking that first step towards taking that surplus and actually putting that into a line item for a strike fund. What are your general thoughts? Are you in favor? Are you vehemently opposed to it? You know, maybe this isn't the appropriate venue though, but I am quite curious though.
Hi, my name is Della, and I work in Public Works and Government Services Canada. I'm also on the collective bargaining committee, so I definitely do thank my colleague Michael for some of the analysis and some of his interventions earlier. I have a few comments regarding this budget proposal, and I have to echo your comment earlier that we do need to see the balance sheet. It's not enough to just show us the income statement and say, okay, vote on this. We do need to see the full picture. And I will come back to this point with another comment I have. Another element, I looked at this table, and it'd be nice if you could actually label the columns a little better, because I assume the first page, the short form, where it says percentage is percentage growth, whereas the other pages, when it says percentages, those are actually shares of the lines themselves. So contributions, say 90% of, let's say for salaries and benefits, 60% of that comes from staff salaries. So maybe label what each of those headers mean a bit better. And looking also at the last column on the first page, 16, 17, the percentages there are not making sense. And I would appreciate actually if somebody else looked at it a bit. Quickly, I can point to line number 15, fees affiliation. And if you look at the number growing from $8,000 to $112,000, that's a 2,000 percentage increase, not a 0.23% increase. So little glitches like that would actually help analyze this quickly compared to actually pulling the calculator out again and trying to make sense of the numbers. So just another review overall of the presentation would help actually when we have to analyze this later. Then I'm coming to specific comments actually from what's being presented here, because, and I look at, I'll come to the strike fund because this is very interesting. Everybody's coming back to the strike fund and trying to make sense of it. But I have a few other comments to put forward first. Somewhere here, communication. First, when I saw communication, I say, oh, great, an increase, fine. But when I look at the detail as to what it entails, a lot of it is postage or printing material. I mean, we're moving into an era where we're going more towards digital communication, electronic communication, so I don't think we should be spending that much more money for printing and postage material. Maybe we should move towards more interactive, more user-friendly websites and communication means rather than printing paper again. I think that's something we should consider as an organization.
Point, and I can specifically let you know what that actually refers to.
Okay, I'd be interested to know, but also we have to be looking forward as an organization moving towards an electronic communication era compared to more paper printing and the like.
Let's be very blunt. We have to send a ratification package to RANS for which we don't have electronic addresses. So if we are to ask members to vote on a final offer, we need to post the ballots.
Okay, so maybe when you explain that,
that's pretty straightforward.
I mean, you know, if we're in a situation where we're back at the bargaining table, as you know, next week, if we get a final offer, that has to go to ratification. That's what that expenditure is anticipating. That,
okay. So then that would explain 1 year increase, but not another 20,000, say the following year maintained for postage. So we can, let me finish all my different points. You can answer them all together at one point if you don't mind. And then going back to then the strike fund. This budget is supposed to be revenues and expenses. A strike fund is not an expense. I don't think this is the place for it. I think this should be rather a discussion on our assets and saying we're moving equity into creating a new liability / asset, which would be a strike fund.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll take a cut at addressing those points, and then if we do need some more technical financial assistance, we'll ask no. Sandy's nodding no. We can ask Sandy, but...
Yes, because I don't think, and I do, and also I have to echo some comments earlier saying $1 million is not enough. $1 million, what does that give us? Yeah. What is that in terms of salaries? If we have to use the strike fund tomorrow, what would $1 million give us? Not much. So I think we need to have broader discussions around the strike funds before we start saying allocating money from an annual budget into a strike fund. I think this strike fund discussion and strike fund establishment should be actually a discussion with our balance sheet, a discussion with our equities and assets and our liabilities, and trying to understand where we want our money to go, not a budget, an annual operating budget. So I think there's a dichotomy here as to what means we're trying to get to establishing a strike fund. I do totally agree we do need to take actions. A strike fund, definitely, we do not have one, so it puts us in a weaker position, but I don't think this is quite the venue yet to go down. Maybe some of the discussion that you say will need to happen over the next year need to happen before we actually create a line, and I don't think that would be the place to create the line. So
you should stay here. He'll start answering, because if it's not clear enough, then...
I'll start just with the that line item in terms of having a commitment for a strike fund versus actually just leaving it in the reserve. As Emmanuel mentioned, we do have an operating reserve, and I think that's probably what would provide a little bit more clarity in terms of just looking at what the that balance sheet actually looks like. But in terms of, it's the whole notion that Emmanuel mentioned in terms of a restricted versus a non-restricted, let's say, reserve, meaning that if we do need to access that reserve and it's restricted, we don't have the latitude that we would require to be able to dip into that quickly, right? So then that...
And maybe Sandy can come up, because maybe we need a more technical explanation, but for an expenditure into restricting the expenditure, because while creating the Defense and Strike Fund, and as Jessica explained, we're putting it there because we are putting a marker down that this will be like the seed funding into the Strike Fund. The engagement with members around the different parameters of the Strike Fund will still happen. But what we need is a budget item, a budget line that says we are actually now taking money from our unrestricted reserve and applying it to a defense strike fund. And it creates a deficit in this year, but it will be on our balance sheet as a restricted asset. Am I saying stupid things, Sandy?
No,
I'm not saying stupid things.
No, I'll just jump
Sandy.
in.
Thank
and
you.
Let's just assume for a moment that we don't have to access that $1 million in that defense fund or the strike fund. And then if you take a look at kind of, well, it's going to end up being a surplus, right, for this current fiscal year. So it's not necessarily something that's going to be utilized, but it's just the way exactly. We have to
well, it's going to be utilized by restricting it into a strike and defense fund. Now, going back to the percentages versus kind of variance calculations, the percentages on the more detailed line are actually percentages of the overall line. So they're not variance percentages. So it's just like the total under the item 1 on revenues should add up to 100%. Everything that's under the 2 should all add up. When you all add them all up, it should equate 100%. And those that don't have sublines, well, they're assumed to be 100% of that line allocation.
That I understand.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yes, on the front page, it's percentage change.
Exactly. So that's what I think we need to make it be clear, that front page is percentage change from what is the baseline, whereas the next one is a share. So just make that headline a bit clearer.
That's a good point.
And unfortunately, that's the way these bloody financial sheets look, just from an actuarial perspective. That's the problem, unfortunately.
And the final comment, Ella, regarding the line item on the fees affiliation. This was related to the CLC affiliation that we have mentioned earlier. So the or so $1,000 is actually the equivalent of 70 cents per member per month based on the number of members. And that would be the CLC fee, affiliation fee.
Just quickly, that I think I understand, but if you look at the last column, 16-17 growth, it shows 0.23% growth. I don't think you would say that growing from $8,000 to $112,000 would
Where
be
do you see the percentage growth? I don't.
What page are you on? Is it the first page?
The first one. Yes, the first one.
Okay, so these are budget. It's based on what was budgeted in 14-15 and what was actually expended in 14-15. It has nothing to do with the future. It's the variance percentage between what was budgeted for and what was actually spent.
No, it's growth from 2014-15. The negative growth is well calculated and well presented. The positive growths are not well presented everywhere. So just if you look at it a bit more, you'll see what I'm saying.
Sandy, can you come over here, please? We need you. We need you.
Sorry, Sandy.
Okay, come. Come have a seat.
Hi.
You're at the center.
This actually should, the decimal place is in the wrong spot. So it just needs to be adjusted.
Oh.
So we will adjust that.
Oh, it's 2,000%.
Exactly.
2,000% times 20.
Yeah, it's, sorry, yes. Yeah.
So there's 3 people who want to speak, but someone hasn't spoken yet. So I would give priority, if you don't mind, to people who haven't spoken yet. Yes, please come. You too. And then Randy and Michael can get.
I'll make my intervention brief, given that there's a lot of people that want to speak. There's just 2 line items that I wanted to come back to and just applaud the NEC for identifying these things as being important. Of course, the first one is the strike fund. And to me, this is important because it's of great symbolic value, and I would even venture to say that it's fairly historic. I realize that $1 million isn't sufficient, and that we have to sort of figure out what the parameters are around how this fund is going to be used, what the protocols are, what we mean by strike action, and how that's going to be used exactly. And as you mentioned, Emmanuel, that's going to be based on a consultative process. But it shows right here, right now, that we're willing to fight and that we want to be taken seriously. So I think that's a really important thing. And the second point that I want to mention is the training, which is also really an important issue. I was involved in the training this afternoon for building effective locals. And if there was one lesson that I sort of took out of that process was that we have a lot of work to do. And if we don't sort of manage to find ways to bring our members involved and to build the capacity of our local executives and to build the capacity of our stewards, then we're going to lose our relevance. And then when it comes to a campaign to decertify, for instance, which the member from ESDC mentioned earlier, going after RAND and that whole framework, it's going to be a lot easier to do that because our members are going to say, well, what the hell have these guys done for us? We don't even see them, at the workplace. So we really got to put a lot of resources and training into addressing that major deficit. So I wanted to applaud you guys for those 2 items in particular.
Thank you, Neil.
Hi, this is Sami Rahman, Health Canada. I have 3 comments to make. One is strike fund. I think agree with all the colleagues, and we should have it. And this is a good opportunity, and I congratulate this new management to realize that. So I really appreciate. Second issue was mentioned briefly here about the AGM as the supreme body, and I totally agree with that. In PIPS, they have 57,000 members. And their AGM is a delegated convention. and I have been the honor to be part of that AGM. So normally 500 people decide about all the bylaws and all that, but at the end of the day, they give the floor to the members to decide what is good for the organization, not a couple of elected members. Because if you look at the election percentage, I mean, how many people vote? If 9%, 8%, so how you justify that? So if AGM is there, people have a choice to come, even if they are not elected members, to speak up. And if they miss the opportunity, then, well, it's their fault. Second, and the last one, I just have a question on mobilization. There are 3 line items. One is communication, one is training and development, and the mobilization is under meetings. So that really puzzled me here. The mobilization is the main core activity which should, I mean, we are talking about strike funds and all that, but until our members are mobilized, all those strike funds are meaningless. So mobilization, I just want to know what mobilization entails for this discussion, because when you look at the last page, mobilization, engagement, education. So how you differentiate education with the training and the communication? I mean, mostly it's a stationary kind of stuff, but I think mobilization should not be under meetings. That's my personal opinion, but still, if it is, I just want to maybe later on find out what activities are we taking under mobilization and how we going to energize our membership, because that is lacking in this organization. I have been in PIPS. I know they have been in, very active since 2012, actually. So, thank you.
If you look at the other piece of information that you have in your package, which is the definition of budget line items, and when you look at the meetings under 13, on the flip side of that page, it says mobilization of the membership has increased significantly. This includes such items as meet and greets with the president, so this is definitely a meeting, travel and educational activities with members, and that could be something like what we have organized, like bargaining forums, like bargaining update forums. These are very often, a meeting. Again, when you mobilize in the workplace, and today at the Effective Locals training, it was really interesting because people realize that in order to get people mobilized, you need to inform them. And in order to inform them, there's, of course, your coffee machine conversation. But there's also these lunch, these brown bag lunches where we can just have conversations and get ideas moving. Again, because it's hospitality, because we'll pay for a meal for that, most of those are actually under the meetings. The noon-hour barbecues that we're having right now, the inter-union barbecues in Public Service Week, this is, again, it's not really a meeting, but we're putting that into that line item. These are all the types of expenditures we're actually including in that line item. Does that answer your question? Thank you, Sami. Yes, Randy.
Thanks. I just was wondering, and maybe it's a suggestion as much as a question, that there should be a financial professional, an accountant, look at the budget before it goes out, because I think I agree with Della. The strike fund is a balance sheet transaction. It's not an operating expense unless you plan to spend it this year. So I think it's, and I do appreciate that the effort is to signal, a priority and set aside, and it's hard to signal a balance sheet transaction. Oh, well, it's not that hard. You would just give them a balance sheet and say, we're doing this. So I think you should have that professional advice. I'm not an accountant, so I would counsel that you have an accountant look at it. The other thing is, there are other ways of signaling this. Now, I think it's good to be honest and transparent with the membership. I have no question that that's the intent of the NEC. If the intent is to build a strike fund over time, and I recall from previous financial statements that the reserve amount that we have is very nominal. Some would suggest it's, you know, it's a number of weeks, but it's certainly not more than, I think, 4 months of operations, right, in the financial. So that's, you know, it's not terrible, but it's not robust. So if you're planning on building a strike fund, you can't really draw on that responsibly. That would be one argument. So you're going to have to increase fees. And I would say the responsible way to signal your intention to your strategy in the budget is to put it in a revenue item in the operating budget in future years. And then you have the debate.
Thank you, Randy.
I would agree with you, Randy. I don't think we're quite there yet, though. I think that's where the difficulty is.
Just on that, like, I think at the November, November is the time frame for initiating the new budget cycle, right? And the November in AGM would be where we would signal that. And when we've had time to also figure out what the options would be to engage in the conversation. So it's a bit early days, but I agree with you. We want to be really transparent. Now, I'll just ask, maybe Sandy, do you want to answer this thing on the balance sheet? Where's Sean McGuire when we need him? I don't know. The guy is the one who's been so involved in the audit committee and everything. He was the one saying if we want to restrict it, we need to put it in our budget this year, and it will create a deficit. But, so, point taken. We will ensure... we have auditors coming, so this is definitely the free advice that we should be getting from them when they start looking at our books. Sure thing. Thanks, Randy. Michael.
This will be quick. I'll start by answering Nick's question. He asked what we think about a strike fund. I think it's a good idea. I'm saying that partly based on common sense and partly based on having sat at the bargaining table for a year and a half. And I think a strike fund is a really good idea based on what I've seen there. I will disagree with one of the previous comments, though. I think CAPE has never needed a strike fund before because we've always had the option for binding arbitration. Now we don't have binding arbitration, so now we need a strike fund. I don't agree that going to binding arbitration is somehow begging. I think it's taking a rational argument to an independent third party who will make a judgment based on the facts, which to me sounds like a really good option to have available to us. So my question is, if we get binding arbitration back because of winning a court case or because of a new government that reinstates it, what then happens to any money we have in the strike fund at that point?
Do we unrestrict?
It's a defense fund.
Yeah.
So we could use it to get really good lawyers for our arbitration, ultimately. Right? It's a defense fund. We defend the interests of our members in all ways, shapes, or forms. Right? Jess, you have an answer to it.
Well, no, I was just going to try to answer by saying that one of the discussions we had at the National Executive when we were discussing the proposed budget was that for this line item in particular, we specifically called it a strike/defense fund because we wanted to have broader purposes. But we also are aware of and intend to develop guidelines and parameters and protocols around this line item so that we know exactly what we can use it for. And we would hope to use some kind of a consultative process to develop that. So if we did have binding arbitration, it was an option again. You know, I wasn't around when when we were making decisions before the last round of bargaining. I don't even know if I was a member of CAPE at that point. I don't know how the decision is made whether to go to binding arbitration, but if we ended up deciding that we were going to use binding arbitration, then the strike/defense fund could still be used to defend the interests of the members related to collective bargaining, but the parameters still need to be developed.
Famous last words, Ryan? Is that what you're coming up for?
Yeah, I would say about if we arrive in a situation where we're returned back to the world that is gone, where we have access to arbitration, we certainly would do again what we're doing now, which is have a national conversation on what direction the union should go and how our money should be spent. and that ultimately at any point in our history, the members should have an opportunity to reflect on the environment and make a decision about how we're going to spend our resources and where we're going to go. But certainly for now, the reality is we need to start building the war chest.
Merci beaucoup, Ryan. Je pense qu'on est prêt à...
I think we are ready to end our meeting. I'm very happy to see the interest of members. I hope that people will take time to look at the clip we'll be preparing and the notes we took today to identify a number of issues. I didn't hear many voices against the idea of having a strike fund. Maybe it would have been more interesting. There would be more contrasting arguments, but I'm sure it might come through email questions we'll get from members. And I'd invite you to speak with your colleagues about the discussion we had tonight, about the documents that they can avail themselves of. And if they have questions, use the general email, general@capes.ca. And we'll be answering these questions. If we have a lot of questions, we'll put them as a FAQ on the website. And this is going to be another tool for members. So thank you very much and have a nice end of the evening.